Hello, friends. I teach one-on-one FaceTime lessons all over the world. And a recent lesson, sort of surprisingly, made it evident that I'd never actually done a putting lesson whenever I do these international lessons. And I happened to do one last week, and it was very successful. And I thought I'd make myself available for a limited number of putting lessons wherever in the world you find yourself. So more about that in a moment. But right now, what I want to do is talk a little about putting, and in fact, particularly the evolution of putters through the 20th century. We're all familiar nowadays with the very elaborate, counterbalanced, and scored faced putters that are prevalent on the tour. But in fact, it started off in a very much more modest way. At the beginning of the 20th century, they had these steel-headed clubs that were just called a blade putter. So you would have seen this kind of putter being used by Bobby Jones and Gene Sarazen, and even all the way up to, with a slight modification to be a little bit more muscular, to a great putter called Bobby Locke, who many people think the best ever, a South African in the 40s and 50s. So the blade putter was essentially just like a very upright, slim iron. It had very little about it other than its limited loft. Now, these actually had more loft than the ones that we putt with nowadays because the greens weren't quite as short and fast. And so they needed to get the ball up on top of the grass, which was a bit thicker. And so they had a little more loft. And so you could actually putt with this from off the edge of the green. Well, you see champions do that even nowadays, but this club had that particular characteristic. Now, it was then subsequently modified, and this was very controversial, into, not that one, a center shafted putter that was called a Schenectady putter, named after a place in, I think, New York. And what the inventor, a scientist, had come up with was that there was a benefit in entering the shaft into the head farther down, not here in the neck. Now, the rules of golf are very uh, jealous of guarding that particular feature because if you put all of the clubs with the shaft entering the head here, it completely changes the nature of the game. And so the USGA permitted it, the Schenectady putter, but the Royal and Ancient did not. They banned it in 1910, is my recollection, and didn't actually reconcile that rule with the USGA until the early 50s. I think it was the one of the rare occasions, probably the only time, where the USGA and the Royal and Ancient actually disagreed about a rule. And so the rule generally is that golf clubs, let's say a wood, can't have more than 5/8 of an inch protruding this way from the axis of the center of the shaft and 3/8 of an inch with an iron. And so that was their way of ensuring that no club would actually have the shaft enter here. Well, the Schenectady putter uh, did so, and there's the history of that. Now, it was extremely successful with putting. It's probably why the Royal and Ancient banned it. So you go forward a little bit, and you'll get to, well, these kinds of designs, which are a flanged blade putter. So we saw the one that Bobby Jones would have used. Now they're a little fatter, shorter, and they had this extra flange on the bottom, which lowered the center of gravity and had some benefits. They also started to put a little bit of a gooseneck in here to get the hand slightly ahead of the ball. So a flange putter, you saw champions like Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player using this style of putter. And one of their contemporaries was probably one of the greatest putters also of all time, who was Billy Casper, and he used these wonderful aluminium-headed clubs called the Ray Cook design. And you can see that it's much larger. It's actually got lines carved into the top to make it easier to aim, which I found. I used one of these in tournament play as a boy. I found it very beneficial, and the feel was excellent. And if you are hearkening back to the Schenectady for a moment, It was often made out of this material, a big chunk of aluminium, but this shaft was entering about here. I'll show a picture. So that was Billy Casper's Ray Cook. And then uh, we had these center shafted putters like the John Letter's Golden Goose, and over here the Acushnet Bullseye. They were usually brass colored, but this is an example where once again the shaft enters the middle of the head. This was subsequent to the change in the rules in 1951 that had prior to that banned it. So then we get to the 60s, and I'm particularly fond of this. In fact, it's still the putter that I use. This was the putter designed by a very eccentric, clever man in Arizona called Carsten Solheim, who uh, came up with a putter called the Answer putter. And it's manganese bronze, is my recollection, that they cast it with. He was one of the very few people, first people, to actually use the lost wax casting method to make golf clubs. And obviously, it's much more elaborate. It has the same center shaft quality of the Schenectady. It's got the offset to put the hands ahead. It's got the flange that I talked about with the Arnold Palmer style of putter. And it was an enormous improvement. I still to this day like this putter and use it. So, of course, it's also partly because I revered my boyhood hero, Tony Jacklin, who won the British Open in 1960 at Royal Lytham and St Anne's, 1969, using one of these, and in fact used this the following year to win the US Open. So I still like using that one. And those are the designs of putter. And then, of course, now they're all very elaborate and counterweighted and everything. So back to putting for a second. The statistics are quite interesting because whether you're a scratch golfer or a 15 handicap or a 30 handicap, your putting will generally occupy about 40% of your strokes. It's quite interesting how consistently that occurs across the spectrum of play. And so if you're a 100 shooter, a 30 odd handicapper, then you're probably taking 40 putts. If you're a 15 handicapper, you're taking 36 or 35. And if you're a scratch golfer, it's more like 28 to 30. And so it's reasonable to conclude that if a 100 shooter, a 30 handicapper, could putt as well as a 15 handicapper, it would be remarkably beneficial to their game. It would shave 5 strokes off their round. And of course, the same for a 15 handicapper, were they able to putt like a scratch golfer. And so there are relatively few places as you get older where you can realistically expect that extra work on your game is going to reduce the score by more than a stroke or two. You might be able to buy another improvement with a club here or there that does something better for you just because it feels and looks and operates better. But it's fairly rare that you can actually promise anybody that a 5 stroke improvement is possible. Putting is that place. Now, obviously, it's closely woven in with chipping because if you miss the greens and which is normal for most people, and you then chip up closely because you're adept, then you have fewer long putts and therefore you'll make more of the putts and your numbers go down. So it is closely interwoven with chipping, but just looking at the putting, uh, here's how we approach this. I'm going to offer 3 in-person FaceTime lessons. I use FaceTime, but I have on occasion used WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And here's how to set up the camera so that it's uh, so that I see the picture that I want to see. So we want the horizon to be about 3/4 of the way up the picture. That gives me a good perspective. So get some trees in here. Lovely. And putter, lovely. Okay, so you're going to have the horizon about 3/4 of the way up the picture. You're going to have a hole that is about 30 feet away and have the golf balls where you're going to hit about 10 feet away from the camera. So there's about 20 feet on the other side to the hole. and put an extra ball down here out of the field of view that's just to the camera's right when it's looking at you. Because I'll have you putt first in this direction to do some initial work, and then we'll putt in that direction for some other purposes. So that's the, let's sign it, BGD. All right, so that's how to frame the picture. Good, signed it, lovely. So that's how to set up the picture that I see. And you'll need a tripod of some sort. I use this little flexible leg one because I can attach it to the top of my golf bag, which happens to be a good height, about the height of a driver. And uh, earbuds, essential, because then we can talk privately and we're not disturbing anyone else. And you don't have to keep on coming up to the camera to hear what I'm saying. So that's very helpful as well. So you're going to position the golf balls about 10 feet away from the camera with a hole in the picture, as I mentioned a moment ago, about 20 feet beyond that. And that will allow me to work on this. Now, bear in mind that wherever you are in the world, do a little calculation about the time that you're going to request. I'm on Pacific time, so about 8 hours ahead of England. And I'm going to do 3 half-hour lessons, offer them. Just email me at brickgolfdad@gmail.com and let me know if you're interested. And we'll communicate and talk about how to pay for it, either PayPal or Venmo. And it'll be £35 in England and $50 in America, and whatever else elsewhere in the world seems to be an equivalent. So I look forward to hearing from you.